Yes, please. Read my mind. Well, here we go. Hi, Lynda.
Hey, Aubrey, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. We survived the snow here in the Chicago area yesterday. It was not a big deal.
Everyone's got snow but us. I'm so tired. We were talking about this yesterday. But
Yeah.
I see a snowy Idaho in the comments. I bet San
Yeah.
Antonio, Texas doesn't have it though, or Miramar Beach, Florida. Hello.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, we got the wind and the cold here, but that's about it. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for jumping on and commenting and letting us know that you're here. Session 2 of our barn quilt collection begins today. I know we wanted to start with some housekeeping, so I'm going to pop that up on the screen just so we can all be on the same page. We do stream this in Facebook as well as YouTube. And if you're on Facebook, you're going to want to go ahead and give our streaming service permission. We love to see your names and your comments come through. within StreamYard. So you would just go to streamyard.com/Facebook and do that. Once you do it one time, you're good to go. Sometimes it'll kick you out. You have to do it again. I just had Nina, who's been in there for a year, and it worked fine. So if you feel like you're not being seen, go in there and do that. Speaking of Nina, how many of you are aware that we have wonderful customer service and we have a real life person who answers the phone? Her name is Nina. And she's been busy this week. So her phone number is on the screen as well as her email address. So if you have any questions, specific questions, feel free to contact her. You can also ask questions while we're live here, and Lynda is the perfect person to answer barn quilt related questions. We
I'll do
also
my
did,
best.
yeah, you'll do great. We also last week showed you how to access updates. If you have any questions on that, let us know, but we did that last week. And now I'm going to pop up Lynda's housekeeping that she wants to share onto the
Yeah.
screen.
I wanted to clarify a little bit more about why we press the edges of our wool, because there was some questions and comments during the week between last week's live and this week's live about pressing the wool, because we have a lot of new people here. So we don't do it just to keep you guys busy and to keep your irons nice and hot. We do it because so many different embroidery machines have so many different styles of feet. So I went out online today and I found just a few feet. Um, it doesn't matter the brand, they're just all different. And so if you look at these, some of the foot in the lower left corner, that's a tiny little round foot. That will definitely get caught on a fluffy wool edge. And even the one in the upper left corner, that one will too. So that's the reason we have you press the edge of your wool. If you happen to have a machine that responds well to not pressing, you go for it. But we do it to protect your machine. And the other reason is a lot of the times the design is digitized so the wool stays inside the block, not on the outside edge where you have to sew it together. So that's a secondary reason. But the most important reason is we don't know what kind of foot you have, so we want to protect you, so that we ask you to press the edge of your wool.
Yes.
That's all I got.
Good. Good. It's always nice to have, these are the tips that you get when you watch the live or join the sew along and pay attention, right? It's nice stuff
Yeah.
to know. All right. Now you had another slideshow. You want me to pop that up here?
Yes, please do.
7-page. Okay, here we go. All right.
Okay, so hold on one second. Of our rolling star quilt today, first of all, we're going to start with showing you how to put together the Meadow star. You know what, Aubrey, let's do that first. Let's do the Meadow star first. Let's not talk about this just yet. I don't want to confuse anybody, but I do want to show a comment here. This is from Sue Gallivan. She tried to register for demo and a snack. Sue, that's at our store, Sewing Concepts in Woodstock. So you please need to call the store for that. That's not done through here. So
I don't have any snacks here.
So give our Woodstock store a call. After the live, of course. Don't do it yet.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the Meadow star.
Do you want it on the quilt sample on the wall or your iron?
Yeah, we're going to do full screen here right now. Okay, so this is Meadow Star. So this is my sample that I completed. I was real excited. I love the red on the outside edge. And we'll just talk about putting it together. So you can see I have it sort of in quarters. I've got this bottom quarter here and my top quarter here. And on this side, I have a full half put together. So this is how I like to put it together. I like to sew my rows together, join 2 rows together, sew 2 more, join them, and then join these to make a full quarter. And then you just keep going. So I thought today I would take you over by my ironing board and show you real close and personal how to pin this correctly and how to stitch it and how to press it. So Aubrey, you can go over by the demo cam.
All righty.
And I'll just get my stuff here.
I did see a comment from Sylvia saying that the wool gummed up her iron after about 10 of the triangles, but it easily washed off. I know that Lynda also likes to put a piece of paper over that. So that might help Sylvia.
Piece of paper or stabilizer or something to like a pressing cloth. something that you can kind of see through so that you can know what you're doing. The other thing I mentioned too in our live last week is I set my iron at the very hottest setting, the wool setting. And some reason that just burns everything off. So that works too. So here I have 2 blocks, and you can see the hopefully you can see the water soluble thread on the outside is white. A little hard to see when it's laying down. So what I need to do is line up, we're going to pin this and stitch right on the water soluble thread lines. So these 2 blocks go right sides together. And I'm going to put a pin right in that corner where the basting stitch is, right there in that corner. It's going to come out right there. And then I'll do the same with the opposite block, put it right in that corner. And I'll do the same thing on the opposite corner of my block. This pin, I want it to come out exactly where my half square triangle fabrics meet. And then I'll come across to this block and put it exactly in that corner. And then I can give both of these pins like a good pinch to hold them really tight together. And I'll take yet another pin and just put it in. Pinch this one. Put that pin in. If you try to do this all in one step, everything shifts. So by putting those little match point pins in, it comes out beautiful. Now this is a 5-inch block, so I'm going to put 2 more pins along there. If you have a larger block, you can add more pins. So you can see that pin comes right out on the basting line, comes straight into the next block right on the basting line. Give it a pinch. Put in another pin and repeat. You'll see a lot of this when we demonstrate the rolling star quilt. So that's how we're going to pin it. Now when you go to sew it, I went ahead and stitched this in a dark thread. I don't know if you can see it. It comes out, let me get the light in a little better. Hopefully you can see the dark thread right there in the seam line on both sides. And I did stitch into my seam allowance a little bit and just did I usually start, I'll tell you where I start. I start right there at the corner and I back stitch into the seam allowance, and then I go forward and stitch into the seam allowance a little bit and then back stitch. I found that to be the best way. If I start right here on the corner, it tends to get bogged down. So by starting inside, back stitching and going forward, I have much better luck. So that's how we will press our seams. I'm going to grab one more thing, Aubrey, before I do any pressing.
All right.
So this is my row of blocks that go directly below this row of blocks. So this row is already pressed. So I stitch a row together and then I press my seams in one direction. And then when I go to do the next row, I want to press them in the opposite direction. So when I look at this row here, my seams are going this direction. So on this row, I want them to go that direction. So they are opposing. So I now know which direction to press this seam. So I look at that every time I do a row. And I'm going to use our little strip stick that we've been talking about for the last month or so. This is a wooden piece. It's a piece of wood with a little bit of batting and covered with a cotton cover. And it's got a curve on one side. Hopefully you can see the curve on the end. And it's flat on the other side. And the flat side goes on your ironing surface. The curved side faces up. And then I'm going to lay my seam right over that curved side and making sure I've got it going the right direction. Let's flip it this way so you can see. Give it a little squirt. I use Mary Ellen's Best Press. And then I take a nice hot iron. Again, I always have it on the wool setting. But by putting my iron on this, even though I'm completely on my block, it won't smash my beautiful quilting. If you have extra wool in there, it won't damage it. And it just makes it go nice and flat. And then I usually turn it over, give it another little press, and I have my beautifully sewn together block. So then I'll join this one, join it to the next row, and then my last quarter is put together. So do we have any questions on that?
I don't see a question on specifically that, but I am going to pop a question up from Elaine about the bobbin when you're using Vanish Light thread. She says, should we use a contrasting bobbin when using the vanishing thread?
That's a good idea if your machine reacts okay to it. I use the pre-wound bobbins. That's always, you can get them in white and black. Well, I suppose it's embroidery bobbin thread, and generally they come white and black. So I suppose if your machine reacts okay, you could definitely do that.
Well, there you go. All right. I don't see any other questions in terms of the strip stick or the joining right there. You did a good job.
I guess I did. So then maybe what we'll do is talk about the little slideshow I have planned. I'm trying to get my solo layout to go away.
Do you want me to do this?
There you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So page 10 of your Rolling Star instructions, it gives you some important quilt tips. So I thought I'd put them up and talk about them a little bit before we go into, we have a video, part 1 video on joining together the Rolling Star quilt. So the first tip is accurate pinning and stitching, which is pretty much what I just showed you with the Meadow Star. So you want to do your match points, you want to pinch them, you want to put a second pin in, and then when you stitch it, you want to make sure your stitching line is exactly on that basting stitch. So that's step number 1. Number 2, on the Rolling Star, unlike the other one I just showed you, you want to begin and end your stitching at the block basting line. That's really, really important, because if you stitch into your seam allowance, you will not be able to accomplish the Y seams easily. Tip number 3, what I just said, do not stitch into the seam allowance, because if you do, you won't be able to bend the seam and get inside that little Y seam area. So begin and end on the block basting line only, and do not stitch into the seam allowance. You always want to check the back of your block on each seam before you move on to make sure you hit the block basting line on both the front and the back, because if you don't, it'll be difficult to match up those little points. And this is really different. I found it way easier to not press this quilt until you're almost completely done. Now, this video we're going to show you today, I did press the very center, but I did not press the outside edges, because I like to press to one side. I don't like to press open. And if you press at all, it's just difficult to get into those little corners. So wait to the very end and press it when you're done. And it's easy. We like to use a strip stick or a seam roll to press your seams at the end so that you don't smash your beautiful quilting. And last but not least, if you're familiar with there's a little term where you twirl the center of an area, like the very center of the Rolling Star quilt. There's a lot of seams coming together. And if you don't stitch into the seam allowance, you can twirl those, which we'll show you again in our video that we have planned. So that's it on that, Aubrey.
All right. You want me to pop this video in?
Sure.
All right, here we go.
Oops. To begin sewing our Rolling Star together, we are going to start in the very, very center.
So I've laid out the center of my quilt. I've got my diamond 1 and my diamond 2 pieces, and I've got my W tri pieces. So I just laid this way so you could see how it'll look when it's finished. But to put it together, we're going to do this. I'm going to pick up all my diamond pieces. I'm going to lay a triangle piece this direction. Let's move all these out of the way. And I will take a diamond and place it just like this. And I will do this to every one of them. Triangle goes this way, diamond goes that way. This is page 11 on the instructions. This is what we'll do first. So I'll do all my diamond pieces, not all of them, just the ones that are in the center because some go on the outside. So we'll lay them all in this orientation, and then we'll take them and put them right sides together. So right sides together, we're going to sew this seam right here. And what's really important on this, there's a lot of things that will make this successful. One of them is accurate pinning and stitching to completely be successful in finishing this quilt. Because there are Y seams, we want to be very, very accurate. So I'm going to put a pin exactly where that basting line is, right here in the corner. Push it through. You could see it landed right on my corner. And then I will do the same on the next, my little diamond blocks. I'll put the pin right into the corner, and I'll give it a good pinch. Take a second pin and put it into my 2 blocks. Remove this pin. I'll do the same thing on this opposite end of the seam. I'll put the pin right into the basting stitch. You can see it landed right onto that outside stitch, and then I'll put it in this basting stitch on the diamond block, pinch it, take a second pin, pin it into the quilt, and as you can see, my cut edges do not match up. That's fine, because we want to line up our stitching lines, not our cut lines. And I'm doing the small quilt, so I don't have a lot of space here, but I'm still going to put 2 other pins. So if you're doing a larger quilt, you may want to put more pins in. I'm just lining up with my pin, the basting line, pinching it, putting a second one in, pulling out the first one, and just repeat that. You can see it goes, let's see, right onto the basting line. Same here. Pinch it, put a second one in, pull this one out. So this is ready to sew. The second thing that's really important with the Y seams is when we stitch this, we definitely will start at the beginning of our basting stitch line right here. Do not stitch into the seam allowance at all. You're going to baste right onto, or stitch right through your basting line, and you're going to end right at the basting line. Do not stitch into the seam allowance. Because we're doing Y seams, we need to have that seam allowance not stitched through. So it'll help you get them in there more easily. So I'm going to go to the machine and stitch these. So once we get our seam stitched, we're going to want to check and be sure we landed on the basting stitch on both sides. Probably hard to see, but I did. The other thing we want to check is you can open it up and check your seam allowances and make sure your stitching didn't go into your seam allowance. That's really important at both ends of your seam. So this one looks good because I can see I didn't get into my seam allowance. I have another one here that I did by just a couple of stitches. So I'm going to fix that because that's going to cause a problem later. You can see right here, I'm just a couple of stitches into that seam allowance. So I'll check all of these over and make sure they look good, and then we'll go on to the next step. So we just finished page 11 of our instructions on putting together rolling star, and you might think the next thing to do would be to press. No, we are not going to press as we go. We are going to wait until most of it is joined together before we do pressing, because when you do pressing, it's very difficult to get into these little Y seams. So by not pressing, it's not. So hold off. Don't get out your iron or your strip stick yet if you're going to use that. We're going to now move on to page 12 of our instructions. So page 12 of our instructions, we're laying out our center diamond again. And in this step, we're going to sew together this seam right here. We're going to sew these two together, and then we'll sew this to this and this to this. You could probably also do these two together and these two together, just this seam right here, as well as these. So we'll sew this seam here and this seam here, this one here, this one here, by using the exact same method. So I'll pick up two of them, put them right sides together, and I will put my pins exactly in the basting stitches at both ends, pin the middles, and stitch on the basting stitches, taking care not to stitch into the seam allowance. Again, that is why we didn't stitch right here, because it'll be very easy to now get in there with a pin and match it up with the next block. If that were pressed, it would be tricky. I know this because the first one I made, that's what I did. So take a cue from my mistakes and don't do any pressing until you're almost done. So I'm pinning the points of my diamond. That's important that they come out really good. Give them a pinch. Put the pin in. I'll put a couple more in here and I'll stitch that seam. So here's that seam stitched. I didn't stitch into my seam allowance, so you can see how nicely this one will fall into place. Also the points, I didn't stitch into my seam allowance. So that's this unit right here. Now I'll do the same to this one. Put them right sides together and start pinning the way I've been pinning from this corner to this corner, not stitching into my seam allowance. And we'll come back when that's finished. So I've got all of these seams stitched together on my 4 sections, and next we will stitch this seam together, and on this side this seam together. So now I have 2 halves completely sewn together. The only thing left to do are to sew these seams right here on each of the triangle pieces on both of them. So because we didn't stitch into the seam allowance, we can just fold this in half and very easily get inside there and continue to do what we've been doing all along, where we pin each end, pin a little bit in the middle, matching up our stitching lines, and begin stitching a little bit of back stitch, a little bit of back stitch at each end until all of those little pink triangle pieces are sewn on there. So here is the final step on page 12 of our directions. I've got the top half of the center put together as well as the bottom half. And now we will work on putting these two together to make the center complete. A little troubleshooting tip for you. This very center can be a little tricky, this last seam right here. And I can see that I am off a little bit in my stitching because these are my basting lines. So I am going to open this seam up about to here where they do match, so I don't have to do the whole thing. And then I'm going to come back and show you a little trick to help you line that up. So here's my little trick. I opened up that seam and I put a color thread in my bobbin, something dark, and I put wash away in my needle, and I stitched exactly on the basting stitch on both of my diamonds, keeping my seam allowances free up here. So now when I go to put my two together, I can see that basting stitch. It's a little tricky to see down into this point because I have a dark thread in my bobbin. It won't show when my quilt's put together, and the wash away will come out in case a little bit of stitching shows, and I'll be able to line up these two basting stitches very easily. Came out much better. I'm very happy with that. Both of my centers are lined up pretty well. So now we're going to join the two sides together, and we're going to stitch from the center out about 1 inch both ways. I like to start in the center and work my way out, and then I'll check and see if it lines up, and then when I'm happy, I'll complete the diamond area of the seam. So I've stitched my center part. I pin matched it the way we've been doing, and I stitched from the center out and the center out this way, and I'm just checking it, and it looks fine to me. And I got a lot of seam allowance in here, and I'll show you how to twirl that in a minute. And so then the next step would be to finish sewing my diamonds together right here. So I'll just put them right sides together and match all of my seams, pin them and stitch them. And then the next step would be to sew the triangle to the diamond, and then our center is finished. My center is completely stitched together. Up next, we're going to do just a little bit of pressing just in this middle area. We're going to avoid pressing out on the outside edges because we still have to join other pieces to it, but we want to get this middle to lay flat. So we're going to do a little pressing now in the center of our rolling star. So I'm going to turn it over, and I will use my strip stick. In case you don't know what a strip stick is, this is a stick that we sell from Hoop Sisters website. You can also sometimes get it at your local quilt store, and it's a piece of wood inside this little padded cover, and one side of it is rounded and the other side is flat. And what you do with it is we'll put it underneath my block, and whatever seam I'm pressing, I will center that seam on the rounded part, and that way when I put my iron down on it, I don't completely smash my quilting. And I'm going to use a little bit of Mary Ellen's Best Press and squirt my seam, and I'm going to press these. I'm only pressing, I'm not putting my complete iron down on this. You'll notice I'm just using the tip of my iron, and I'm just pressing this little seam here in between my diamonds to one side. I'm not going to press the seams out here because we're going to join blocks to that, and I don't want those pressed yet. And I'll just rotate this around and do all of those little seams, pressing them all the same direction, trying to get into that center part the best I can. So once I get all of these inner diamond seams pressed in one direction, I'm going to pull out that strip stick, and I'm going to work on getting my seams in the center to twirl. This is a quilting technique that you may be familiar with, but you get all your seams to kind of make a little swirl right in the middle. You just play with them a little bit until they lay the way you want. And once they do what you would like, you can just with the tip of the iron, just my very tip of my iron, I'm just gonna press that down. You can give it a little Mary Ellen's best press. And then when we turn this over, our block is going to lay fairly flat. Looks pretty good. And I haven't pressed these seams out here at all. I've left them completely the way they were because we still need to get in here and get our seams, our other parts of our quilt attached to it. So I've only pressed these seams here in the center and then the very center. So as we go on and add more pieces, we can press the seams that are not going to be attached to anything else. So there we go. That's the very center of our block.
Yay, we got it done. So I didn't see any questions here. I did see a comment from Shelly. She said that's the easiest way I've seen a Y seam with sewing a Y seam without sewing a Y seam. So yeah, because usually you pivot during that Y seam. So we didn't have to do that here.
That was great.
Yeah. There you are, Aubrey. Let's get rid of this one.
Now, this is the time, you guys, too, where if you have questions, this is the time to ask. And even if we come back later and answer them, Lynda can help you out. And I know there is a part 2 that we're going to be posting. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, so this is a long process doing this, and I wanted to take you through step by step, seam by seam. And if you've looked at the directions for the rolling star, I did follow those precisely. So the part 2 is going to be the rest of the quilt. So here's the little quilt. So part 2 is going to be all these corners that go around the middle that we just did. And we thought we'd post that separately so that you can watch that at your leisure and not do it during our live. And if you have questions, you could post them there too.
Yes. And I just saw a question from Lori, and she said, have you ever used fork pins?
I have used fork pins. I don't like them.
I think they're way better.
I think they're very thin, and I think they work well with fabric, but we've got battleizer, wool, fabric, and I think they're too thin to hold on to what we're doing here. So I still like my pinch and pin technique that Annie and I both do.
Okay. And then we have a question from Shelly who says, is it better to put water-soluble thread in the bobbin or top?
Definitely the top. You do not need to switch out your bobbin during this whole process. And go to Mary Ella's question right below that.
Yes.
She's confused. There doesn't seem to be a basting stitch on your block. The stitching line is the same as a basting line. Yes, the stitching line. So maybe my term confused you. Let me see if I have a block laying around here I can show you. It's that outside stitching line that you see. That basically, that step number 1 is what you're seeing on the back. It's that first placement stitch. So that's what we are calling the basting line or the stitching line. That's the line you need to match up.
And that's a great question. And if you were confused by it, somebody else probably was too. So thank you for asking. Okay, and then I have a question from Joan who says, it looks great. So if you don't sew all the way, is there a little opening? Like, you know how you're not like how you're not sewing into the seam allowance.
Yeah, because I stitched, well, where's the camera? I stitched it. Yeah, I suppose that you could stick a pin in there maybe, but if you stitch right to the end of that stitching line, there will not be an opening. And if there is, you maybe need to go just a little bit further.
All right. Mary Ella, I'm sorry, has a follow-up question. She said the lines are in the same location.
Yes, they are. They're the outside placement stitch. Basically, step one, the first step you stitch onto your battleizer is what we're matching up. So yeah, they're always going to be in the same location.
And they're basically the shape of the block.
Whether it be at a diamond, a triangle, or the little petal block. Hi, Jane, my buddy Jane.
We love Jane. She said it's so
Yeah.
pretty. All right. Anything else we should cover before we post the next part 2?
I can't think of anything. Oh, and I think it was Ellen earlier before we did the video that mentioned putting a color thread in her bobbin, which is kind of what I did in that little tip when I had trouble matching one of my seams because it was really tight in there.
Mhm.
I did it after the fact though. I didn't do it during the embroidery process. So
I think that's what Catherine just said too. She said using a
yeah,
dark bobbin for step number 1 helps.
yeah. That would help. Yes.
Okay, let's see. We got Mariella says, does the permanent stitch lie inside of the basting stitch?
The permanent, well, step one is a permanent stitch, but it's a placement stitch. It doesn't really hold anything down. It just gives you a place to put your fabric or your wool, depending on what you're doing. And so it's permanent. It'll stay in there. It doesn't go away. Hopefully that answers your question.
And then you might want to wash it out if you join and you can see it a little bit.
Right.
So, but you don't have to.
So
how long?
Go ahead.
The lives are going to be available forever in the Facebook group, on the YouTube channel, and I'm also attaching them to the product on the website. Okay, Diane's question. Go ahead.
Diane posted the middle of her quilt and it was beautiful. I'm pretty
Is
sure
that
it was
who it
you,
was?
Diane. I'm pretty sure it was because I think I looked it up before we started. She had the middle of her quilt done and she says, our diagrams and instructions for putting the rolling star together are fantastic. Well, good. I'm glad because you didn't have any problems or questions. And that was my fear that people would have a problem, but so far it's all been good.
I love it. They're not chicken, Lynda. They're doing it.
They're not chicken.
Aw, this is a good job, Lynda.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah. Jane also says, she's just being so sweet. Look at that. Look at all those.
I think she has pom-poms. She's a great little cheerleader.
Yeah, we love that. We love pom-poms. And Diane said it was her. So she posted her center within our VIP Facebook group. So if you're watching, you can watch it either place, but the VIP Facebook group, you can post your pictures and all that good stuff. And it was Diane's picture and I saw it as well. It's really pretty. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions, Lynda. I think you're getting it.
Good. So watch for the video. You're going to post the part 2 video like when we get off of here?
Yes.
So it should be up pretty soon. Oh, Tammy says she's still chicken.
I love
That's okay, Tammy. Maybe you'll give it a try after watching a couple of videos.
That's right. You can always test some, like sew a couple and get your feet wet. She also commented earlier and said, you make it look so easy.
By the power of editing, video editing. I got it done like that.
That's awesome. So I'm going to post the part 2 video, which is just like kind of what you just saw. She's going to walk you through. And then we have a guide within our Facebook group. So if you just click the guides at the top, all the videos associated with the barn quilt are in the guide that says barn quilt collection. So I'm going to make sure that these 2 videos are in there too, so you can check those out at any time. Okay. No, there's no secret word. I didn't set up a giveaway this time. I'm going to have to do that next week.
We'll do it next week.
We'll do it next week. But we've given away $100 already this week. We're doing giveaways like crazy. So, okay. Well, thank you all for watching, and what are we doing next week?
Next week, we are going to spend the whole time talking about the optional back, the edge to edge. So we're going to do that. So get ready.
All right. I'm excited. We'll see you guys then. Thank you, Lynda.
Right. Bye. Thank you.